A poor girl sits at the wrong table during a blind date without knowing she was with a billionaire, and that mistake led to an unexpected love story. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. It was a crisp spring morning in Seattle, and the downtown library, where Claire Peterson worked, was already alive with soft murmurs and the rhythmic rustling of pages. Claire, a slender woman of 45 with a warm yet guarded smile, adjusted her glasses and walked purposefully towards the children's reading area. A group of second graders was seated in a semicircle, eagerly awaiting her storytelling. For a moment, as she held up a tattered copy of Charlotte's Web, the room seemed to exhale, pausing in quiet anticipation. "This was my favorite book growing up," she began, her voice smooth yet tinged with nostalgia. "Because even when life seemed impossible, friendship made it all bearable." As she read, her mind wandered. Claire had been a widow for 8 years. Her husband, Mark, a quiet yet fiercely loving man, had passed away suddenly, leaving her with a modest insurance payout and a heart full of unspoken dreams. She had once imagined a life brimming with adventure, traveling to Paris, writing novels, hosting grand dinners. But now her days were spent amid stacks of books, her evenings in the solitude of her tiny apartment, and her nights in the quiet company of literary classics. Her co-workers, particularly Linda, a vivacious woman in her early 60s, often teased her about her routine. "Claire, you're too young to be living like a retiree," Linda said one afternoon as they shelved books. "Try an online dating app. They're not all horror stories, I promise," Claire chuckled, shaking her head. "I wouldn't even know where to start." But Linda was persistent. Later that week, she thrust her phone towards Claire, displaying a profile on a dating app. "Here, I made you an account. You can thank me later." Claire rolled her eyes but didn't delete the app. That night, after finishing a chapter of Anna Karenina, she hesitated, then clicked the icon. The profile seemed more like an alien catalogue than potential suitors, but one message stood out. It was simple. "I'd like to take you to dinner." Linda had already arranged a date. The restaurant was a beacon of elegance Claire rarely allowed herself to imagine entering. Its soft golden lights glowed against dark wooden walls, and the hum of sophisticated conversation made her self-conscious in her borrowed dress and thrift store heels. She'd taken a deep breath before stepping inside, rehearsing lines to introduce herself to her blind date. "Table for Claire Peterson?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. The maitre d', a polished young man with a practiced smile, gestured towards a small corner table. Claire walked over, clutching her purse tightly. A man was already seated, impeccably dressed in a dark blazer, engrossed in a menu. "Hi, I'm Claire," she said, extending her hand nervously. He looked up, his sharp blue eyes meeting hers, and for a moment his surprise flickered, just long enough for Claire to notice, but his expression softened, and he stood, shaking her hand. "Daniel Harrison," he said warmly. "It's a pleasure." They sat, and Claire felt her cheeks flush. "I hope I'm not late. Traffic was a little—" "Not at all," he interrupted smoothly. "I've only just arrived myself." Claire found herself relaxing as the conversation began to flow. She spoke about her work at the library, her passion for children's literacy, and the joy she found in simple pleasures, like discovering a rare book at a flea market. Daniel listened intently, his gaze steady and encouraging. As the evening progressed, Claire noticed subtle cues: Daniel's polished manner, the expensive watch on his wrist, his precise diction, that hinted he might not be her blind date after all. Yet something about his presence felt oddly comforting. Midway through dinner, her phone buzzed discreetly in her purse. She excused herself to check the message. It was from Linda. "Where are you? Your date is waiting near the entrance." Claire's heart sank. The blood drained from her face as realization dawned. She had sat at the wrong table. Mortified, she returned to Daniel, prepared to apologize profusely and leave. But as she stumbled over her words, he held up a hand. "No need to explain," he said, smiling. "I rather enjoyed your company. Besides, mistakes often lead to the most interesting moments." His words lingered as Claire left the restaurant, her cheeks still burning. Back at home, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, unable to shake the evening's events. Daniel's smile, his calm demeanor, everything about him seemed to whisper a story yet untold. For the first time in years, Claire felt the stirrings of something she hadn't dared to name. Possibility. The soft glow of the restaurant's chandeliers illuminated the delicate wine glasses and pristine linens, casting a warm hue over the room. Claire shifted slightly in her chair, feeling a touch more comfortable as the conversation unfolded. Daniel Harrison, the man sitting across from her, exuded a quiet confidence. His tailored suit and polished demeanor suggested a life she could hardly imagine. Yet his attentive gaze was surprisingly disarming. For a while, their discussion centered on safe topics. Claire spoke about her love of books, weaving in anecdotes about the children she worked with at the library. Her face lit up as she described organizing storytime sessions and how the kids would eagerly guess what happened next in their favorite tales. Daniel listened with genuine interest, his brows occasionally lifting at her thoughtful insights. "You must have the patience of a saint," he remarked with a faint smile. "I imagine children aren't always the easiest audience." Claire chuckled. "They're not, but they're the most honest. They remind me why stories matter, why they've always mattered." As she spoke, she felt the weight of the day melt away. This wasn't the usual hollow exchange she had dreaded about online dating. Daniel seemed to genuinely enjoy her company, responding with curiosity and warmth. For a moment, it didn't matter that this felt surreal, that a man like him seemed so at ease sharing a table with her. Yet, an inkling of doubt began to creep in. There was a subtle, nagging sense of disparity. His polished manners and effortless charm contrasted sharply with her modest background. She found herself noticing his cufflinks, a sleek silver watch, and the casual yet confident way he carried himself. It all seemed slightly out of place for the setup Linda had arranged. "Tell me," Daniel said, his voice cutting through her thoughts, "what drew you to your work at the library? It's not a career most people would call glamorous, but you seem deeply passionate about it." Claire hesitated. Surprised by the depth of his question, she took a sip of water, gathering her thoughts. "I think books have always been my anchor," she admitted. "When I lost my husband, they became a lifeline. Stories reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's always hope, always something worth holding on to." Daniel's expression softened. "That's beautiful, Claire. I imagine you've given that same sense of hope to others, even if you don't realize it." His words caught her off guard. There was an earnestness in his tone that felt far too personal for a man she had just met. For a moment, she wondered if he could see through her carefully composed exterior to the woman who often doubted her worth, who wrestled with insecurities late at night in her small, dimly lit apartment. As the waiter brought dessert, Daniel shifted the conversation toward lighter topics. He shared snippets about his travels, the places that had captured his heart, and the little moments he cherished, watching a sunrise over the Alps, wandering through the bustling streets of Tokyo. His stories painted a picture of a life far removed from hers, yet the way he described them made her feel as though she'd been there with him. Claire smiled, but her mind raced. There was something he wasn't saying. The ease of his conversation, the casual references to high-end experiences, it all hinted at a life much grander than she could have imagined. She pushed the thought aside, unwilling to let suspicion cloud what had been an unexpectedly enjoyable evening. Towards the end of the meal, Daniel leaned back slightly, his hands resting on the table. "This has been refreshing," he said thoughtfully. "I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that felt this genuine." Claire looked down, flustered. "I'm sure you say that to all your dates." "No," he replied firmly, his gaze steady. "I don't." Her heart skipped a beat at the sincerity in his voice. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed in her purse. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from Linda. "Your date is still waiting for you at the entrance." "Where are you?" Claire's stomach sank. Her hands grew clammy as she pieced it together. She had made a mistake, a colossal, mortifying mistake. Daniel wasn't her date. Her real match was likely still sitting alone, wondering why she hadn't shown up. She looked up at Daniel, her face flushed with embarrassment. I think I've made a terrible error," she stammered. "You're not. This isn't." Daniel's expression didn't waver. Instead, he offered a small, knowing smile. "I had my suspicions," he admitted, his tone light, "but I decided not to ruin the evening." Her cheeks burned. "I am so sorry. I must seem completely ridiculous." "Not at all," he said gently. "In fact, I'm glad you sat down. It's been a pleasure getting to know you." Claire's pulse raced as she fumbled for an apology, but Daniel waved it off. "Sometimes life surprises us," he added. "And tonight, I think it surprised us both." As Claire left the restaurant, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Embarrassment mingled with an inexplicable thrill, the kind she hadn't felt in years. The evening hadn't gone as planned, far from it. But as she stepped into the cool Seattle night, she couldn't help but feel as though fate had nudged her in a direction she couldn't yet understand. Claire's fingers trembled as she tucked her phone back into her purse. The message from Linda lingered in her mind, a glaring reminder of her blunder. Across from her, Daniel's steady blue eyes radiated an unexpected calm. She opened her mouth to speak, but found her voice caught in her throat. Finally, she blurted, I think I owe you an explanation." Daniel tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a faint, amused smile. "I thought you might." Her cheeks burned. "You see, this was supposed to be a blind date," she began, her words rushing out like water breaking a dam. "And I must have, well, I obviously sat at the wrong table." Daniel leaned back, resting his elbows on the chair's arms, his demeanor unshaken. "So I'm not your intended date?" he asked, a glimmer of mischief in his tone. She shook her head, mortified. "No, and I'm so sorry. This must have been incredibly awkward for you." "Not at all," Daniel said smoothly. "In fact, I can't recall the last time I enjoyed a dinner quite as much." His words, delivered with such ease, left Claire momentarily speechless. He wasn't angry or dismissive. Instead, he seemed charmed. She fumbled for something appropriate to say, but her thoughts scattered. "Still, I feel awful for the mistake." "I should go find—" Daniel interrupted her with a gesture, his hand lifting slightly. "Claire, there's no need to rush off," he said, his tone warm and reassuring. "It seems fate had a different plan for the evening." She laughed nervously, the tension in her shoulders loosening just a fraction. "You're surprisingly forgiving for someone who just endured my mix-up." "I wouldn't call it enduring," he replied with a chuckle. "Though I do admit I suspected something was amiss when you didn't seem to recognize me." Before she could respond, a man in his early 50s approached the table. His graying hair was neatly combed, and he wore a tailored blazer that seemed well suited for the upscale ambiance of the restaurant. He stopped a few steps away, his gaze flicking between Claire and Daniel. "Excuse me," the man said hesitantly. "Are you Claire Peterson?" Claire's heart sank. She nodded, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Yes, that's me." "I think I might be your intended dinner companion," the man said gently, his eyes holding no trace of accusation. "Linda's friend." Claire stood abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. "Oh, Mr. Jacobs, I'm so sorry. I must have—" She glanced at Daniel, whose expression remained composed, as though this turn of events was merely a continuation of the evening's peculiar charm. Mr. Jacobs offered a kind smile. "It's quite all right. These things happen. But I see you're already in good company." Claire stammered, trying to find the right words to explain herself. But Daniel intervened. Rising from his seat, he extended his hand to Mr. Jacobs. "Daniel Harrison," he introduced himself with practiced ease. "I've had the pleasure of dining with Claire this evening." For a moment, Mr. Jacobs appeared taken aback, but he quickly composed himself and shook Daniel's hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Harrison." Claire's mind raced. The situation had become a tangled web of awkwardness, and she wasn't sure how to untangle it without offending either man. But Daniel's calm demeanor seemed to diffuse the tension. "Perhaps," Daniel said, turning to Claire, "I should give you two some time to get acquainted properly." Claire's stomach churned at the thought of leaving the conversation unfinished, but she nodded. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything." He inclined his head, his expression enigmatic. "The pleasure was all mine." As Daniel walked away, Claire felt the loss of his presence like a sudden chill. She forced herself to focus on Mr. Jacobs, who kindly suggested they move to another table to start fresh. The rest of the evening passed in polite conversation, but Claire's thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel, the way he listened, the way he spoke with such measured kindness, and the way he made her feel seen. The following day at the library, Claire found herself recounting the surreal evening to Linda. "I don't know why he stayed so calm," she admitted. "Most people would have been annoyed or walked away. Maybe he enjoyed your company," Linda suggested with a knowing grin. "Sometimes the best connections happen by accident." As Claire sorted through a stack of children's books, she couldn't help but wonder. Could a chance encounter with a stranger, one that began with a mistake, truly hold meaning? Or was she simply grasping at the idea of something more, something she hadn't dared to hope for in years? Later that afternoon, as she prepared to leave for the day, a voice called her name. She turned to see a young waitress from the restaurant, someone she vaguely recognized. The woman, carrying a small envelope, approached with a tentative smile. "Hi, Ms. Peterson. I hope I'm not intruding," she began. "You probably don't remember me, but I was your waitress last night." Claire blinked in surprise. "Oh, yes, of course. How can I help you?" The waitress handed her the envelope. "Mr. Harrison left this with the manager after you left. He said it was for you." Heart pounding, Claire accepted the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mistakes often lead to unexpected adventures. I hope this isn't the last chapter of ours. Daniel." Claire's breath caught as she read the words. Against all logic, against every cautious instinct she had honed over the years, she felt a spark of something she couldn't name, a sense that perhaps her story was just beginning. The sound of children's laughter filled the library as Claire settled into her chair at the small reading corner. Her voice wove through the room, bringing to life the characters of the story she was sharing, yet her thoughts weren't entirely on the pages before her. The events of the past few days lingered at the edges of her mind, particularly Daniel's note, now tucked safely in her drawer at home. It wasn't just the words that had struck her, but the man himself, his calm confidence, his attentive nature, and the way he seemed to truly listen. Later that evening, Claire stood at the entrance of a cozy cafe. Daniel had invited her here to meet again, and after much internal debate, she had accepted. The small bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, and there he was, seated at a corner table with a book in hand. He looked up, his face lighting up with a warm smile. "Claire," he greeted, standing as she approached. "I'm glad you could make it." She offered a tentative smile in return, settling into the seat opposite him. "Thank you for the invitation. This is a lovely place." "I thought you might like it," he replied. "They make an excellent Earl Grey." As the conversation began, it unfolded naturally, much like their first dinner. Claire spoke about her work, the challenges of maintaining programs for underprivileged children in the face of shrinking budgets, and her passion for ensuring that every child had access to the joy of books. "It must be exhausting," Daniel observed, his tone thoughtful. "Yet, you seem so dedicated. What keeps you going?" Claire hesitated before replying, her gaze lowering to the delicate porcelain teacup before her. "It's the moments when a child's face lights up because they've discovered a story that speaks to them. Those moments remind me why it's all worth it." Daniel nodded, clearly impressed. "It's rare to meet someone so committed to their work." "And you," Claire ventured, steering the conversation toward him. "What is it you do, exactly?" He smiled, leaning back slightly. "I manage a business, a rather complex one. It involves a lot of moving parts and, occasionally, difficult decisions." There was a simplicity in his answer, yet Claire sensed there was more beneath the surface. She didn't press further, unsure if it was her place. Instead, she let the topic shift to books, a subject they both seemed eager to explore. Hours passed unnoticed, their cups long emptied. Claire found herself laughing at one of Daniel's stories about a disastrous attempt at learning French, his impeccable delivery and self-deprecating humor drawing her in. But beneath the light-hearted exchanges, Claire couldn't shake a growing unease. It wasn't just Daniel's polished manner or the subtle references to a world far removed from hers. It was the nagging sense of inadequacy creeping into her thoughts, whispering that this connection was too good to be true. As they walked out into the crisp evening air, Daniel paused, turning to her. "Claire, I'd like to see you again, if you're willing." His directness caught her off guard, and for a moment she hesitated. I'd like that too," she finally said, her voice soft. The sincerity in his smile eased her doubts, at least for the moment, but as she returned to her small apartment that night, the weight of her uncertainties pressed heavily on her chest. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed to echo the question she couldn't escape. Could a woman like her truly belong in Daniel's world? The following days brought a mix of anticipation and introspection. Claire couldn't help but share snippets of her budding connection with Linda, whose enthusiasm was as infectious as ever. "Claire, don't overthink it," Linda urged during a lunch break. "He clearly sees something special in you. Just take it one step at a time." It was advice Claire wanted to follow, but doubts lingered. Her modest life, her financial struggles, how could they possibly fit into the orbit of someone like Daniel, whose every action hinted at a life of privilege? The next time they met, Daniel surprised her. They strolled through a park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. He listened as Claire spoke of her efforts to secure funding for a new literacy program, nodding thoughtfully. "Have you considered reaching out to local businesses?" he suggested. "Sometimes they're looking for meaningful ways to engage with the community." Claire glanced at him, intrigued by the idea. "It's worth exploring," she admitted, "but it's hard to know where to start." Daniel smiled. "I might know a few people who could help." His offer was casual, almost offhand, yet it left Claire feeling a mix of gratitude and discomfort. She didn't want to rely on him, not so early in whatever this was between them. Yet his willingness to help felt genuine, free of expectation. As the evening drew to a close, Claire found herself torn. She was drawn to Daniel's kindness, his intelligence, and the ease with which he seemed to connect with her. But the growing disparity between their worlds loomed like a chasm, and she wasn't sure how, or if, it could be bridged. That night, as she curled up on her couch with a book, Claire's thoughts wandered to Daniel's parting words. "You don't have to figure it all out at once. Sometimes it's enough to just take the next step." She closed her book, her gaze lingering on the city lights outside her window. Perhaps, she thought, he was right. Perhaps it was time to take a step forward. Even if she couldn't yet see the path ahead, Claire's day at the library started like any other. She sorted through returned books, helped a group of children find their favorite adventure stories, and guided an elderly patron through using the new e-reader system. But her thoughts were elsewhere, drifting back to the quiet confidence in Daniel's voice when he said, "Sometimes it's enough to just take the next step." The memory of their walks and conversations lingered with her. His offer to help connect her to potential donors for the library had been kind, yet it also unsettled her. She wasn't used to receiving help, let alone from someone whose life seemed as far removed from hers as Daniel's. By mid-afternoon, Claire was startled by a knock at the library office door. It was Linda, holding a large brown envelope with a teasing grin. "This just arrived for you," she said, placing it on the desk. "Looks important." Claire's name was neatly written across the front in bold, elegant handwriting she instantly recognized. Her heart skipped as she opened it. Inside, she found a letter and a small donation receipt for the library, a generous sum, enough to fund the children's literacy program for the next 6 months. The note attached was short and unsigned, but Claire knew who had sent it. For the stories yet to be told, let them find their voice. She sat there, stunned. The donation was more than just money. It was a statement of faith, a gesture that said he believed in her work and her passion. Yet the act stirred conflicting emotions. Gratitude swirled with unease, and her pride prickled at the thought of accepting such a gift. Linda peeked her head back in, sensing Claire's distraction. Earth to Claire. "Everything all right?" Claire managed a nod. "Yes, just an unexpected surprise." Linda raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. "Well, surprises can be good. Let me know if you need anything." That evening, Claire replayed the day's events in her mind as she prepared a simple dinner. She couldn't ignore how deeply the gesture had touched her, but a nagging voice in her head questioned if she was ready for what this connection with Daniel might bring. The following week, Claire decided she couldn't let the gesture go unacknowledged. She called Daniel, her hands trembling slightly as she held her phone. "I received the donation," she began when he picked up. "Thank you. It means so much to the children and the library." "I'm glad it helps," Daniel replied. "The work you do is important, Claire. It deserves support." There was a pause, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Claire added, "Would you like to visit the library, see the program in action?" His voice warmed with approval. "I'd love to." When Daniel arrived a few days later, Claire couldn't help but notice how out of place he seemed in the modest library. His tailored coat and polished shoes a stark contrast to the worn carpet and overflowing shelves. Yet, he greeted everyone warmly, his genuine interest apparent as he spoke with the children and listened to their stories. At the end of the visit, Claire walked Daniel to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "It means a lot, seeing you here." "I'm the one who should be thanking you," he replied. "You've built something remarkable here." The sincerity in his tone made her smile, though doubt still lingered. Could she truly fit into his world, or he into hers? Their connection felt both exhilarating and fragile, like a thin thread stretched between two very different lives. Later that week, an encounter at the grocery store deepened Claire's uncertainty. She ran into Lisa, the waitress from the restaurant, who smiled warmly as they chatted near the produce aisle. When Claire mentioned Daniel's visit to the library, Lisa's expression brightened. "He's a good man," Lisa said. "After my brother's accident last year, he helped cover the cost of the surgery. He never asked for anything in return. That's just who he is." Claire was taken aback by the revelation. Daniel hadn't mentioned anything about helping Lisa's family, yet this glimpse into his character only added to the growing complexity of her feelings for him. She left the store with more questions than answers. As she settled into bed that night, Claire stared at the note he had sent with the donation. His belief in her, his quiet acts of kindness, they tugged at something deep within her, something she hadn't dared to acknowledge for years, a yearning to trust, to believe in possibilities, and to let go of the walls she had built around her heart. Yet, the doubts persisted. Could she navigate the challenges of a relationship with someone like Daniel? Could she hold on to her sense of self without being swallowed by the vast differences between their worlds? The answers weren't clear, but as Claire drifted to sleep, one thought echoed in her mind. Perhaps Daniel was right. Perhaps the first step wasn't about having all the answers, but simply being willing to take it. The library was quieter than usual that morning, the hum of the coffee machine filling the space as Claire organized the new arrivals. Her hands moved methodically, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on Daniel, the donation, and the questions that lingered unanswered. She was jolted from her reverie when a familiar voice spoke up. "Lost in thought, dear?" It was Olivia, one of the library's regulars. She was a woman in her early 70s, with silver-streaked hair and a sharp wit that matched her discerning eyes. Claire had always admired her warmth and the way she seemed to carry an entire world of wisdom in her unhurried steps. "Oh, good morning, Olivia," Claire replied with a small smile. "I was just thinking," Olivia set her book on the counter, tilting her head. "About anything or anyone in particular?" Claire hesitated, then laughed softly. "I suppose there's no fooling you, is there?" "Not usually," Olivia admitted with a sly grin. "Come now, spill. It's not like me to find you so distracted." Reluctantly, Claire shared a carefully abridged version of the events. She spoke of the donation, Daniel's visit to the library, and the conflicting emotions she wrestled with, gratitude mingled with uncertainty. Olivia listened intently, her expression thoughtful. When Claire finished, Olivia leaned back, folding her hands. "He sounds like quite the intriguing man, but I sense that isn't what troubles you." Claire nodded slowly. "It's just, his world feels so different from mine. I don't know if I belong in it or if he belongs in mine." "Ah," Olivia mused, "the age-old question of belonging. But tell me, Claire, has he given you any reason to feel out of place?" "No," Claire admitted. "If anything, he's been kind, supportive, but that's what makes it harder. I'm not used to someone stepping in like that." Olivia's eyes softened. "Let me tell you a story," she began, her tone measured. "Once upon a time, I had a chance at love, someone who adored me, who believed in me when I doubted myself. But I let my fear get in the way. I thought I had to keep my world neat and tidy, separate from his, and in the end, I lost him." The confession took Claire by surprise. Olivia had always seemed so self-assured, so content. "I didn't know," Claire murmured. "Few do," Olivia replied with a rueful smile. "But it taught me something. Love doesn't fit into neat boxes. It asks us to risk, to step beyond our comfort zones, and sometimes that's where the most beautiful things happen." The words lingered long after Olivia left. Claire found herself mulling over the parallels between Olivia's story and her own budding connection with Daniel. Could she let go of her fears long enough to see where this path might lead? That afternoon, Daniel called unexpectedly. "Are you free this evening?" he asked, his voice warm and inviting. "I'd like to take you somewhere." Claire hesitated, but remembered Olivia's words. "Yes," she said finally, "I'd like that." When Daniel arrived, he led her to a small, tucked-away gallery downtown. Inside, the walls were adorned with vivid, emotive pieces, paintings that seemed to tell stories without words. As they walked through the space, Daniel spoke about his love for art, his appreciation for the way it could convey emotions that words often couldn't. Claire found herself opening up too, sharing how books had always been her escape, her way of understanding the world. "Stories are like bridges," she said. "They connect us, even when we think we're worlds apart." Daniel smiled at her words, his gaze lingering. "I couldn't agree more." As they moved through the gallery, Claire noticed a young woman in the corner, her sketchbook in hand. She seemed familiar, and when their eyes met, recognition flickered. It was Lisa, the waitress from the restaurant. Lisa approached hesitantly. "Ms. Peterson," she said. "What a surprise!" "Lisa," Claire exclaimed, "I didn't know you were an artist." Lisa blushed. "Just trying to be—" "Daniel encouraged me to show my work here." Claire turned to Daniel, her eyes widening. "You didn't mention that." He shrugged modestly. "Lisa's talent speaks for itself. I just gave her a nudge." The encounter left Claire both impressed and unsettled. Daniel's generosity seemed boundless, but it also reminded her of the disparities between their lives. Yet, as the evening unfolded, she found herself laughing, sharing stories, and feeling a growing ease in his presence. When Daniel dropped her off that night, he lingered at her door. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know this isn't always easy." Claire smiled, the doubt still there but quieter now. "Thank you for inviting me." As she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it, her heart full. The evening had been a step, a small, significant step, towards something she couldn't yet define. And for the first time, she felt the stirrings of hope that maybe, just maybe, she was capable of bridging the gap between their worlds. The envelope rested on Claire's kitchen table, unopened and heavy with implications. It was an invitation, ornate and embossed, inviting her to a benefit gala at one of the city's most prestigious art galleries. The name at the bottom, written in Daniel's fluid handwriting, felt like a personal challenge. Claire had already rehearsed a dozen excuses for why she couldn't attend. The event was far outside her comfort zone, a world of glitz and opulence she'd only ever glimpsed in movies. Yet, every time she thought about declining, Olivia's voice echoed in her mind. Love doesn't fit into neat boxes. The next morning at the library, Olivia noticed the furrow in Claire's brow before she even spoke. "You look as though you've been asked to wrestle a lion," she said with a smirk. Claire sighed, holding up the invitation. "I might as well have been." Olivia took the envelope, studying it. "A gala, is it?" "Oh, Claire, this isn't a battle. It's an opportunity." "For what?" Claire asked, crossing her arms. "To feel completely out of place." Olivia's expression softened. "To show yourself that you can rise to any occasion. And who knows? You might surprise yourself." That evening, after much internal debate, Claire called Daniel. "I'll come to the gala," she said quickly, before she could change her mind. "I'm glad," Daniel replied, his voice warm. "It wouldn't be the same without you." The night of the event, Claire stood in front of her mirror, her reflection almost unrecognizable. Linda had insisted on helping her find the perfect dress. A midnight blue gown that shimmered faintly under the light. Her hair was styled simply, and a touch of makeup enhanced her features. She looked elegant, though she felt anything but. When Daniel arrived to pick her up, his smile widened as he took her in. "You look stunning," he said, offering his arm. At the gallery, Claire was immediately struck by the sheer grandeur. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a golden glow, and the air buzzed with the hum of polished conversation. She gripped her clutch tightly, feeling like an imposter among the sea of perfectly coiffed guests. Daniel introduced her to several of his acquaintances, each interaction a balancing act between politeness and authenticity. Some were warm, intrigued by her work at the library, while others barely hid their skepticism. One woman, a striking figure in an emerald gown, leaned in close and murmured, "You must be quite special to have caught Daniel's eye." Claire smiled tightly, unsure if the comment was meant as a compliment or a veiled insult. As the evening progressed, Claire wandered away from the crowd, drawn to a quieter corner where a young artist displayed his work. The pieces were raw and emotive, a stark contrast to the polished surroundings. The artist introduced himself as Max, and as they talked, Claire learned he had been sponsored by Daniel. "He believed in me when no one else did," Max said. "It's rare to meet someone like him." Claire's heart swelled with pride for Daniel, but it also deepened the divide she felt between their worlds. She admired his ability to inspire and uplift others, but she couldn't help wondering if she truly belonged in the orbit of someone so remarkable. Her thoughts were interrupted when a tall, poised young woman approached. She had Daniel's piercing blue eyes and an air of quiet authority. "You must be Claire," she said, her tone neutral. "I'm Lily, Daniel's daughter." Claire's pulse quickened. "It's lovely to meet you." Lily's gaze was assessing, her smile faint. "I've heard a lot about you." Claire wasn't sure how to respond. Lily's presence was both intimidating and intriguing. She sensed an unspoken challenge in the young woman's demeanor, as though she was silently questioning Claire's place beside her father. Their conversation was cut short when Daniel appeared, his expression softening at the sight of his daughter. "Lily," he said warmly, "I see you've met Claire." "Yes," Lily replied, her tone polite but distant. "We were just getting acquainted." Later that evening, as they left the gallery, Claire's mind raced with conflicting emotions. The admiration she had felt earlier for Daniel was now tinged with self-doubt. Meeting Lily had been a stark reminder of the complexities of his life, and of the gaps she feared she couldn't bridge. When Daniel asked if she had enjoyed the evening, she hesitated before answering. "It was an experience," she said carefully. Daniel studied her face, his brow furrowing slightly. "Claire, I know this isn't easy for you, but I'm glad you came." His sincerity was disarming, and for a moment her doubts receded. "I'm glad too," she admitted softly. As she lay in bed that night, the echoes of the evening played in her mind. The grandeur, the people, Lily's probing gaze, all of it left her feeling both exhilarated and unsettled. Yet amid the whirlwind of emotions, one thing became clear. She was no longer the same woman who had sat at the wrong table. She was stepping into a new world, one uncertain and full of challenges, but also rich with possibilities. The morning air was crisp as Claire stepped out of the cab, adjusting her scarf against the breeze. The towering building before her was sleek and modern, its glass facade reflecting the bustling city below. This was Daniel's world, and for the first time, she was about to step into it fully. Inside, the lobby was a study in understated opulence. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, and abstract art adorned the walls. Claire felt a pang of unease as she waited for Daniel. When he arrived, his presence was like a calming force. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice warm yet laced with understanding. "As I'll ever be," she replied, forcing a small smile. He led her upstairs to a boardroom where a small gathering awaited, a mix of sharply dressed professionals and philanthropists. Daniel's introduction of her as a key partner in the library's literacy initiatives was met with polite nods, though Claire couldn't help but feel the weight of their curious gazes. As the meeting progressed, Claire listened intently to discussions about community outreach and charitable investments. When Daniel encouraged her to speak about the library's programs, she hesitated but eventually found her voice, sharing stories of children whose lives had been transformed by access to books. Her words were met with interest, even admiration, but she caught glimpses of skepticism too. A man in his 50s with a commanding presence leaned back in his chair and asked, "What's the real impact of these programs? How do you measure success?" Claire felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "Success isn't always about numbers," she began. "It's about moments, like when a child who's struggled with reading finishes their first book on their own, or when a parent tells me their child now dreams of becoming a writer. Those moments can't be quantified, but they're transformative." Daniel's approving nod bolstered her confidence, but she couldn't ignore the undercurrent of judgment from others in the room. After the meeting, Daniel introduced her to more of his colleagues, each interaction feeling like a delicate balancing act. She managed polite smiles and thoughtful answers, but her discomfort grew with each passing moment. The stark contrast between this polished world and her modest reality felt insurmountable. As they left the building, Daniel seemed to sense her unease. "You were incredible in there," he said. "They saw your passion. It's impossible to miss." "Maybe," she replied softly, "but I don't think I'll ever fit into this world." Daniel stopped, turning to face her. "You don't have to fit into it, Claire. That's not why I wanted you here. I wanted them to see what I see, your authenticity, your heart. That's what makes you remarkable." His words warmed her, but doubts lingered. Could their connection truly bridge the gap between their lives? That evening, Daniel invited her to a dinner event hosted by a prominent charity. The venue was even more extravagant than the gala, an ornate ballroom with crystal chandeliers and tables adorned with fine china. Claire felt like a fish out of water, though Daniel's steady presence helped her navigate the evening. As they mingled, Claire noticed Lisa among the waitstaff. The young woman's face lit up upon seeing her. During a quiet moment, Lisa approached. "I didn't expect to see you here," Lisa said, her voice low but warm. "Neither did I," Claire admitted. "It's a lot to take in." Lisa nodded, her expression growing serious. "I've been in this world long enough to know it can be intimidating, but Daniel, he's different. When my brother needed surgery, he didn't just write a check. He followed up, made sure we had everything we needed. He's not like the others." The confession added another layer to the complexity of Claire's feelings. Daniel's generosity and humanity shone brightly, yet they only deepened her fears of inadequacy. Later, as they danced, Claire voiced her concerns. "Daniel, I don't know if I can keep up with all of this. It's beautiful, but it's not me." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Claire, I'm not asking you to change who you are. I fell for you because of who you are. This world, it's just noise. What matters to me is what we build together." His sincerity brought tears to her eyes, and for a moment, the noise faded. As they swayed to the music, Claire allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could create something extraordinary amidst the chaos. Claire sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The dress Daniel had picked out for the evening lay draped across the chair, a simple yet elegant design in emerald green. It was unlike anything she would have chosen for herself, and that was precisely why it felt so foreign. Tonight was another step into Daniel's world, a high-profile charity gala, and she wasn't sure she was ready. At the gala, the grandeur was even more intimidating than she'd anticipated. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, the air heavy with the scent of expensive perfumes and clinking champagne glasses. Claire felt the weight of her insecurities press against her chest as they entered. Her hand tightened around Daniel's arm, her lifeline in the sea of wealth and sophistication. "You're going to do great," he whispered. Sensing her nerves, his words helped, but only slightly. As they moved through the room, Claire encountered the first of many hurdles. A group of Daniel's business associates greeted them, their smiles polite, but their eyes appraising. They asked Claire about her work, and though she spoke passionately about the library and the children it served, she caught a few raised eyebrows and exchanged glances among them. The unspoken judgment was clear. What was someone like her doing with someone like Daniel? Still, Claire pressed on, determined not to let the evening overwhelm her. She found brief moments of solace in conversations with those who seemed genuinely interested in her stories, like the older woman who ran a literacy foundation and shared Claire's love for classic literature. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the whispers and stares she couldn't ignore. The true test came later, when Lily appeared. Dressed impeccably, Daniel's daughter seemed to glide through the room with the confidence of someone who belonged. She approached Claire directly, her expression unreadable. "Claire," Lily said, her tone calm but laced with an edge of authority, "can we talk for a moment?" Claire nodded, her stomach twisting. Lily led her to a quieter corner of the room, away from the noise and prying eyes. "I wanted to understand something," Lily began, her gaze steady. "What are your intentions with my father?" The question caught Claire off guard, her cheeks flushing with a mix of embarrassment and indignation. "My intentions," she echoed, trying to maintain her composure. "Yes," Lily said bluntly. "You seem genuine. But let's not pretend there isn't an imbalance here. My father's been through enough to deserve honesty." Claire took a deep breath, her initial defensiveness giving way to an unexpected clarity. "I understand your concerns," she said, her voice steady, "and I won't deny that our lives are very different. But I care about your father because of who he is, not what he has. If you think I'm here for anything else, you don't know me." Lily's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied Claire for a long moment before nodding curtly. "I'll be watching," she said, her words a mix of warning and reluctant approval. As the night wore on, Claire's resolve was tested further. A few attendees made thinly veiled comments about her background, and though Daniel was quick to intervene, the sting of their words lingered. She wondered if she was fooling herself, thinking she could ever truly fit into his world. Later, as they sat in the car on the way home, Claire broke the silence. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Daniel. It feels like everyone is waiting for me to fail." Daniel turned to her, his expression serious. "You're not failing, Claire, and you're not alone in this. I know this world can be cruel, but I also know you have the strength to rise above it." His words touched her, but they didn't erase her doubts. She wanted to believe she could navigate this new life, but the challenges felt insurmountable. The thought of Lily's scrutiny, the judgment of Daniel's peers, it all loomed over her, a constant reminder of her perceived inadequacies. As Claire lay in bed that night, her mind replayed the evening's events. She thought of the moments when she'd stood her ground, the small victories amid the doubts. Perhaps Daniel was right, perhaps she was stronger than she realized. But the question lingered. Was her strength enough to bridge the chasm between their worlds? The gallery's backroom buzzed with low murmurs and the soft clink of glasses as the evening's art auction unfolded. Claire found herself standing near the edge of the crowd, observing more than participating. She was still processing her conversation with Lily from the previous gala and the lingering unease it left behind. Daniel had been understanding, yet the weight of Lily's scrutiny hadn't lifted entirely. A warm voice pulled her from her thoughts. "I was hoping I'd run into you," Claire turned to see Max, the young artist whose vibrant pieces she'd admired at her first gala. He carried the same unassuming charm, his boyish features softened by a tentative smile. Beside him stood an older woman with an air of grace and warmth that immediately put Claire at ease. "Max," Claire greeted, genuinely pleased. "It's nice to see you again. And this is my mother, Sarah," Max introduced, stepping aside to make room for the woman. "She's the real artist in the family." Sarah laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's not true, but I appreciate the flattery." As they spoke, Claire learned that Sarah had known Daniel for years, their bond forged in the aftermath of a financial crisis that had left Sarah and Max struggling to stay afloat. Daniel had stepped in, offering not just financial support but guidance and encouragement. Sarah's gratitude was evident, but she spoke of Daniel not as a benefactor, but as a dear friend. "Daniel has a way of seeing people," Sarah said, her tone thoughtful. "He doesn't just help, he believes in you. It's rare." Claire's chest tightened at the words. They mirrored her own experience with Daniel, yet hearing them from someone else made the sentiment even more profound. As Sarah excused herself to speak with another guest, Max lingered. "You know," Max began, his voice quieter, "it's easy to feel out of place here, but my mom always says that if someone believes in you, it's worth sticking it out." Claire nodded, the words resonating deeply. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear them. Later in the evening, Daniel found her as she browsed a collection of paintings. His presence was steady, grounding, as he slipped an arm around her waist. "Making new friends?" he asked, glancing towards Sarah and Max, who were deep in conversation. "They're wonderful," Claire replied. "Sarah told me about how you helped them." Daniel shrugged, his expression modest. "They didn't need much help, just a little support to get back on their feet. They've done the rest." "That's not how Sarah sees it," Claire said softly, her gaze meeting his. "She sees you as someone who believes in people." Daniel's eyes searched hers, and for a moment the noise of the gallery faded. "I believe in you, Claire. I hope you know that." Her breath caught, but she nodded. "I'm starting to..." As the evening wore on, Claire found herself speaking with more guests, her initial apprehensions slowly giving way to genuine curiosity. She met donors, artists, and even a few other librarians who had been invited to discuss collaborative projects. Each conversation felt like a small victory, a step toward bridging the gap she so often felt. But the night wasn't without its challenges. At one point, Claire overheard a snide comment from a well-dressed couple about her small-town charm, and how Daniel seemed to have a penchant for charity cases. The words stung, but Claire chose not to dwell on them. She had made it through worse. The night ended with a quiet moment between her and Daniel on the gallery's balcony. The city sprawled below them, lights glittering against the dark sky. Claire leaned against the railing, her thoughts swirling. "I'm proud of you," Daniel said, breaking the silence. Claire turned to him, her brow furrowing. "For what?" "For being yourself," he said simply. "In a world that can be overwhelming, you didn't let it change you." His words brought a lump to her throat. "It's not easy," she admitted. "But tonight, I felt like I could belong, even if it's just a little." Daniel smiled, his hand brushing against hers. "That's all it takes, just a little. The rest will come." As they left the gallery together, Claire's mind lingered on the connections she had made. Sarah's warmth, Max's resilience, Daniel's unwavering support, they all painted a picture of a life she hadn't dared to imagine for herself. For the first time, she began to see that she didn't have to fit into this world perfectly. Perhaps her place in it was meant to be uniquely her own. The library's quiet hum seemed like a distant memory as Claire stood amidst the grandeur of the Harrison family estate. Daniel had invited her to what he called a casual gathering, but there was nothing casual about the polished marble floors, the glittering chandeliers, or the sea of impeccably dressed guests. It was a fundraiser, and the room buzzed with anticipation as patrons sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries. Claire felt her nerves prickling as she scanned the crowd, catching glimpses of familiar faces from past events. She recognized Lily, Daniel's daughter, standing by a grand piano, speaking to a small group with the poise of someone used to commanding attention. Their eyes met briefly, and Lily offered a polite but distant smile. "Claire," Daniel's voice cut through the noise, grounding her. He approached with his usual calm confidence, his presence a welcome anchor in the overwhelming environment. "You're doing great." She smiled faintly, unsure if she believed him. "This is a lot, Daniel." "I know," he said softly, placing a hand on her back. "But you belong here. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." His words were reassuring, but they couldn't fully erase her apprehension. As the evening unfolded, Claire found herself in conversation after conversation, sharing stories about the library and the programs she'd built for children. Some guests listened with genuine interest, while others nodded politely, their eyes already scanning for someone more notable to engage. Then came the moment Claire had dreaded. A woman she didn't recognize, a sharp-eyed brunette with a commanding presence, approached her with Lily in tow. The brunette, introduced as Evelyn, was one of Daniel's oldest business partners. "So, Claire," Evelyn began, her tone as polished as her pearl necklace, "it's fascinating to see how Daniel's tastes have evolved over the years. Tell me, how did you two meet?" Claire hesitated, glancing at Lily, who wore an inscrutable expression. "It's a bit of a long story," Claire began, but Evelyn cut her off with a sly smile. "Do tell. We've got time." Claire felt her cheeks flush, the room seeming to shrink around her. Before she could respond, Lily spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "Evelyn, I think that's enough." The tension crackled in the air as Evelyn raised an eyebrow, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. "Just making conversation, dear," she said lightly, though her gaze lingered on Claire a moment too long before she walked away. Claire turned to Lily, her heart still racing. "Thank you," she said quietly. Lily's expression softened, and for the first time, Claire saw a flicker of something other than hostility in her eyes. "Evelyn likes to test people," Lily said. "Don't take it personally." The moment was brief, but it felt like a turning point, a small crack in the icy wall that had existed between them. As the evening progressed, Daniel took the stage to address the crowd. He spoke eloquently about the fundraiser's cause, a scholarship program for underprivileged students, and his words were met with enthusiastic applause. But as he stepped down, another figure emerged from the crowd, a man with sharp features and an air of confrontation. "Arthur," Daniel muttered under his breath, his posture stiffening. The man, who Claire soon learned was Daniel's estranged former business partner, took the microphone uninvited. "A round of applause for Daniel Harrison," Arthur began, his tone dripping with mockery. "The man of the hour. But let's not forget the real story here." The room fell silent as Arthur launched into a tirade, accusing Daniel of using his wealth and influence to cover up unethical practices in his business dealings. The words cut through the air like daggers, each one aimed directly at Daniel's reputation. Claire's heart pounded as she watched Daniel remain composed, even as the accusations piled on. She wanted to do something, to say something, but she felt paralyzed. Then, to her surprise, it was Lily who stepped forward. "That's enough, Arthur," she said, her voice steady and strong. "You've had your say, now it's time to leave." Arthur laughed bitterly, but Lily didn't waver. Her resolve seemed to embolden others in the room, and within moments, security escorted Arthur out. The tension in the room lingered, but Daniel quickly took control, thanking the guests for their support and assuring them that the matter would be addressed. His calm authority reassured the crowd, and slowly the atmosphere began to recover. Later, as the event wound down, Claire found herself alone with Daniel in the quiet of the garden. The cool night air was a welcome relief after the heat of the confrontation. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Daniel said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "You handled it well," Claire replied, though her own voice wavered with emotion. "But Daniel, is any of it true?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "No," he said firmly, "but the truth doesn't always matter to people like Arthur. He's trying to hurt me, and he doesn't care who gets caught in the crossfire." Claire nodded, her heart aching for him. "I believe you," she said softly. Daniel reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Thank you," he whispered. "That means more than you know." As they stood together under the starlit sky, Claire realized that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. The challenges they faced were daunting, but for the first time, she felt certain of one thing: she wasn't facing them alone. The familiar scent of aged paper filled Claire's senses as she moved through the library's quiet aisles, her hands brushing against the spines of books she had shelved countless times before. It was supposed to be comforting, a return to routine after the tumultuous events with Daniel. Yet her heart was heavy, her mind replaying their last conversation. Daniel's world, with its glittering grandeur and relentless scrutiny, felt like an unscalable mountain. But the emptiness left by her decision to step back from him lingered like an open wound. She'd hoped the solitude would bring clarity, yet each passing day only deepened her confusion. During a quiet moment in the break room, Olivia appeared, carrying her usual stack of worn novels. She set them down with a knowing smile. "You've been quieter than usual, dear. Care to tell me what's on your mind?" Claire hesitated, then sighed. "It's Daniel," she admitted. "I stepped away, thinking it would help me figure things out, but instead I feel lost." Olivia sat beside her, her gaze gentle but probing. "Lost how?" "It's everything," Claire said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "His world, his life, it's so different from mine. I thought I couldn't handle it, but now I'm not sure if I was running away from him or from myself." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "Let me tell you something I learned the hard way," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "Running never solves anything. It only delays the moment you have to face what's truly in your heart." Her words struck a chord, but before Claire could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was a notification from a local magazine featuring an article on Daniel's philanthropy. The headline read, "The Quiet Billionaire, a Champion for Community Change." Claire opened the article, her breath catching as she read about Daniel's anonymous donations, including one to her library for the children's literacy program. The revelation filled her with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Even in her absence, he was thinking of her, supporting the work she loved. Later that day, Claire found herself standing in front of the library's newly renovated children's section. The bright colors, cozy reading nooks, and shelves brimming with books were a testament to Daniel's generosity. She watched as children eagerly explored the space, their laughter filling the air. It was a vivid reminder of the impact he had, not just on her, but on countless others. That evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, Claire couldn't shake the weight of her thoughts. She pulled out a small notebook, one she hadn't used in years, and began to write. A list of what frightened her, what she cherished, and what she wanted. The act was cathartic, bringing clarity to the swirling chaos within her. The next morning, Claire sought Olivia again. "You were right," she said, her voice steadier now. "I've been running, and it's time I stopped. But I don't know how to face him." Olivia smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Start by being honest with him and with yourself. The rest will follow." Bolstered by Olivia's encouragement, Claire decided to take a step forward. She spent the afternoon drafting a letter to Daniel, pouring her thoughts onto the page. She wrote about her fears, her admiration for his generosity, and her desire to find a way to bridge the gap between their worlds. Before she could second-guess herself, she sealed the letter and dropped it off at his office. It was a small act, but it felt monumental, a step toward confronting the choices she'd been avoiding. As the sun set over the city, Claire returned to the library, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She didn't know what Daniel's response would be, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. Whatever happened next, she was ready to face it head-on, trusting in her newfound strength to guide her through. Claire stood at the wrought-iron gates of Daniel's estate, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the intercom button. She hadn't planned what to say, but the weight of their unresolved feelings drove her here. The memory of his quiet strength and her own insecurities lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. Moments later, the gates swung open, and Claire made her way up the cobblestone driveway. The mansion loomed ahead, its grandeur both intimidating and beautiful. When Daniel opened the door, surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by something softer. "Claire," he said, his voice tinged with relief. "I didn't expect. Please, come in." She stepped inside, her heart pounding. The entryway was warm and inviting, filled with soft light and the faint scent of cedar, but Claire's gaze drifted to the far end of the hall, where she heard voices, Daniel's and another, sharper tone. "Is this a bad time?" Claire asked, hesitating. "No," Daniel assured her, "but I think there's something you should hear." He led her to a sunlit sitting room where Lily stood, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The tension in the air was palpable, but Lily's demeanor softened when she saw Claire. "I'll go," Lily said abruptly, moving toward the door. "No," Daniel interjected gently. "Stay. We need to talk." Claire hesitated, feeling like an intruder, but Daniel gestured for her to sit. He turned to Lily, his expression a mix of patience and determination. "Lily, I know why you've been pushing Claire away," he began, his tone calm but firm. "And I understand. But this isn't fair, to her or to us." Lily's jaw tightened, her gaze darting to Claire. "You don't get it, Dad. She's not like the others. She's real, and that scares me." The admission startled both Claire and Daniel. Lily's voice cracked as she continued. "After Mom, you closed yourself off. You buried yourself in work and philanthropy, and now you're letting someone in again. What if she leaves? What if you get hurt?" Claire's chest ached at Lily's words. For the first time, she saw the vulnerability behind the younger woman's guarded exterior. Lily wasn't trying to sabotage them out of spite. She was protecting herself from the fear of loss. Daniel stepped closer to his daughter, his voice steady. "Lily, I'm not asking you to trust Claire overnight, but I need you to trust me. I'm happier than I've been in years, and it's because of her." Lily glanced at Claire, her eyes glistening. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to. I just didn't know how to handle it." Claire found her voice. "I understand, Lily, I do. And I'm not here to take anything away from you. I care about your father, but I also care about what this means for all of us." The sincerity in her words seemed to reach Lily. She nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing. "Thank you," she murmured before slipping out of the room. As the door clicked shut, Daniel exhaled deeply, turning back to Claire. That wasn't how I expected tonight to go. Claire managed a small smile. Me neither. They sat together, the room now filled with a quieter, more reflective energy. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. I've been meaning to tell you something, he began. I've spent so much of my life trying to keep my wealth from defining me. But I realize now that hiding it doesn't make it less of a burden. It just makes it harder for the people I care about. Claire nodded, understanding the weight of his words. It's not your wealth that's intimidating, Daniel. It's the walls that come with it, the expectations, the judgments. But I see you beyond all of that. I just need to learn to trust myself in your world. His gaze softened, and he reached for her hand. We'll figure it out together. No more walls. The vulnerability in his tone mirrored her own, and for the first time in weeks, Claire felt a sense of peace. They weren't perfect, and their worlds might never align seamlessly, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They had each other, and they were willing to try. The morning headlines blared with accusations, casting a shadow over Daniel's pristine reputation. Words like corruption and embezzlement sprawled across the pages, tying his name to a controversial charity project. Claire sat at her kitchen table, the newspaper trembling in her hands. The accusations felt surreal, a stark contrast to the man she knew, a man of integrity, whose generosity had transformed countless lives. Her phone buzzed, and she saw Max's name flash on the screen. Claire, he began, his voice tight with emotion. I don't know if you've seen the news, but it's bad. Daniel's being dragged through the mud, and it's all because of the charity project I'm involved in. What do you mean? She asked, her pulse quickening. Max explained that the charity's funds had been mismanaged, and some of the blame was being directed at Daniel as its main benefactor. Though Daniel's involvement had been purely philanthropic, the media frenzy painted a different picture. Max's attempt to defend Daniel in an interview had only added fuel to the fire, inadvertently implicating him further. Claire's heart sank. She could hear the guilt in Max's voice, the regret that his words had been twisted into accusations. Max, this isn't your fault, she said firmly, but we need to figure out what's really going on. Later that day, Claire arrived at Daniel's office. The usually bustling space was unusually quiet, the tension palpable. When she was ushered into his office, Daniel looked up from his desk, his face etched with exhaustion. Claire, he said softly, you didn't have to come. I did, she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. I needed to see you. Daniel gestured for her to sit. It's a mess, he admitted, rubbing his temples. They're using every misstep, every grey area, to paint me as the villain. And the worst part, I don't even know who's pulling the strings. Claire reached across the desk, placing her hand over his. We'll figure this out. You've built your life on doing good, and that's what people will remember. But even as she spoke the words, Claire knew the road ahead would be treacherous. The media frenzy had already begun to tarnish Daniel's image, and the whispers of doubt were growing louder. Still, she couldn't stand by and watch as his character was dismantled piece by piece. The following days were a blur of chaos. Claire found herself in the center of the storm, fielding questions from reporters and deflecting invasive inquiries about her relationship with Daniel. But the tipping point came when a journalist cornered her outside the library, asking if she thought Daniel's wealth had blinded him to the realities of the people he claimed to help. Claire's response was instinctive, her voice firm but calm. I've seen firsthand the lives Daniel has changed, she said. He doesn't just write checks. He invests in people, in their potential. His actions speak louder than any accusation. The quote made its way into the evening news, shifting the narrative slightly. But the battle was far from over. Behind the scenes, Claire worked tirelessly with Daniel's team to uncover the truth. It was Lisa, the ever-resourceful waitress-turned-ally, who provided the breakthrough. "I overheard something at a meeting," Lisa confided to Claire one evening. "There's someone inside the organization, someone who's been feeding false information to the media. I think they're trying to sabotage Daniel for personal reasons." Lisa's revelation led Claire and Daniel to a paper trail, a series of forged documents and suspicious transactions that pointed to a former partner of Daniel's, someone with a vendetta against him. The discovery was both a relief and a new source of tension. Exposing the truth would clear Daniel's name, but it would also mean dragging someone else into the spotlight. The decision weighed heavily on Daniel. "I've always believed in protecting people, even from their own mistakes," he told Claire one evening as they pored over the evidence. "But this feels different." Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not doing this out of malice," she said. "You're defending yourself and the work you've done. That matters." The turning point came during a public forum where Daniel addressed the accusations head-on. Claire watched from the audience, her heart swelling with pride as he spoke with clarity and conviction, laying out the facts and reaffirming his commitment to his philanthropic mission. The evidence they'd uncovered was presented clearly, dismantling the false narrative piece by piece, but it was Claire's impromptu speech that left the room silent. "I've worked alongside Daniel on projects that have changed lives," she said, her voice steady. "He doesn't just offer hope, he embodies it, and I won't stand by while his integrity is questioned." The forum ended with a standing ovation, the tide of public opinion beginning to shift. As they left the venue, Daniel turned to Claire, his expression a mix of gratitude and awe. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," she replied, her voice soft but resolute. "Because I believe in you." For the first time in weeks, Daniel smiled, a real, unguarded smile. And in that moment, Claire knew that no matter the challenges ahead, they would face them together. The morning light filtered through the wide windows of Daniel's office as Claire arrived, ready to face the day's challenges. The events of the past weeks had cemented her commitment to helping clear Daniel's name, and today was pivotal. Together, they would delve deeper into the allegations surrounding the charity project, piecing together evidence to expose the true culprit. Lisa was already waiting, her usual sharp demeanor now tinged with urgency. "I found something last night," she began as Claire and Daniel joined her around a table cluttered with documents. "There's a series of emails that link the forged documents directly to Arthur. Daniel's former partner had been a lingering shadow in their efforts to clear his name, his vendetta against Daniel now becoming more apparent. The emails painted a picture of deliberate sabotage, from spreading false rumors to manipulating the charity's financial records. Daniel's jaw tightened as he skimmed the pages. "This proves his intent," he said, his voice steady but laced with anger. "But we need more to make it undeniable." Claire leaned forward. "We'll get it," she said firmly. "This isn't just about you, Daniel. It's about protecting everything this charity stands for." Later that day, Claire visited the library to meet Max, who was working on a series of paintings inspired by the children who had benefited from the charity. His vibrant artwork captured their stories, from a young girl who'd learned to read through the program to a boy who'd found solace in drawing during difficult times. "These kids, they're why this matters," Max said, his voice soft but resolute. "If we let this scandal define the charity, they lose, and I can't let that happen." Claire nodded, her heart swelling with pride for Max's determination. His work was a reminder of the lives they were fighting for, grounding her resolve amidst the chaos. As evening fell, Daniel invited Claire to his home, where they reviewed the progress made. Sarah joined them, bringing a sense of calm and wisdom that only she could provide. Over cups of tea, she shared her own story of how Daniel had supported her family during their most challenging times. "Daniel doesn't just give money," Sarah said. "He gives hope. That's what makes this fight worth it." Her words echoed in Claire's mind as they worked late into the night, their efforts culminating in a plan to present the evidence against Arthur at a public hearing. The stakes were high, but the team's determination was unwavering. The hearing was held in a grand hall filled with reporters, supporters, and skeptics alike. Daniel stood at the forefront, his presence commanding yet humble as he outlined the charity's mission and the obstacles it had faced. Claire watched from the sidelines, her heart pounding as Lisa stepped forward to present the incriminating emails. "This is about truth," Lisa said, her voice clear and unwavering. "About holding those who seek to harm accountable and ensuring that the work we do here isn't tainted by deceit." The room buzzed with tension as the evidence was laid bare, each piece dismantling the false narrative that had threatened to overshadow the charity's accomplishments. When it was Claire's turn to speak, she took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she stepped onto the stage. "I've worked with Daniel and seen firsthand the lives his vision has touched," she began, her voice steadying as she spoke. "This isn't just about clearing his name. It's about protecting the futures of those who depend on us to do what's right." Her words were met with applause, a ripple of support that spread through the room. By the end of the hearing, the tide had shifted. Arthur's malicious intent was exposed, and Daniel's name was cleared. That night, as they celebrated the victory at Daniel's home, Claire felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The trials they'd faced had tested them in ways she hadn't anticipated, but they had emerged stronger, their bond unshaken. In the quiet moments of the evening, Daniel turned to Claire, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You've been my anchor through all of this," he said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Claire smiled, her hand resting gently on his. "We did it together," she replied, "and that's what makes it matter." For the first time in their journey, Claire felt certain of her place by Daniel's side, not as an outsider looking in, but as an equal partner in a shared mission to make a difference. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, its grand columns and mahogany benches amplifying the gravity of the moment. Daniel stood at the defense table, his composure steady despite the weight of the accusations against him. Claire sat in the gallery, her heart pounding as the case against Daniel unfolded. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was a battle for the truth, for justice, and for the future of the charity they had worked so hard to protect. Lisa, who had been instrumental in uncovering Arthur's sabotage, was the first to testify. She spoke clearly and confidently, detailing how she had discovered the forged documents and the deliberate attempts to mislead donors. Her testimony was bolstered by a series of emails and financial records, all pointing directly to Arthur's hand in the scheme. As Lisa stepped down, Daniel's lawyer rose to present the evidence. The once vague accusations against Daniel began to crumble as the truth came to light. Arthur, seated at the plaintiff's table, shifted uncomfortably, his carefully curated facade beginning to crack. Claire watched as Daniel took the stand. His voice was calm but firm as he described his involvement with the charity, his intentions to help underserved communities, and his heartbreak over the scandal. "My goal has always been to make a difference," he said. "I never imagined that someone would use this cause for personal gain." His words were met with murmurs of support from the gallery. Claire felt a swell of pride, but also a deep ache. Daniel's vulnerability was on full display, and she knew how much it had cost him to stand here and fight. When the court adjourned for a recess, Claire found herself alone in the corridor, her thoughts racing. Olivia and Sarah approached, their presence a comforting reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. "You've been strong through all of this," Olivia said, her hand resting gently on Claire's shoulder. "But remember, strength doesn't mean doing it all yourself. Lean on him and let him lean on you." Claire nodded, the weight of those words settling over her. This wasn't just Daniel's fight, it was theirs. As the hearing resumed, the defense presented a final piece of evidence, a recorded conversation between Arthur and a former colleague. The recording revealed Arthur's intentions to discredit Daniel and take over the charity for his own gain. The courtroom fell silent as the words played, leaving no doubt about Arthur's culpability. The judge's decision was swift. Arthur was found guilty of fraud and ordered to pay restitution. Daniel's name was cleared, his integrity vindicated. After the hearing, the atmosphere outside the courthouse was electric. Reporters swarmed Daniel, but he waved them off, his focus solely on Claire. She met him halfway, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "You did it," she said, her voice trembling. "No," he replied, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We did it." That evening, Daniel hosted a gathering at his home for everyone who had stood by him. The air was filled with laughter and relief, but Claire couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. Despite their victory, the scars of the ordeal ran deep. Later, as the party wound down, Daniel found Claire on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. He joined her, the silence between them both comfortable and charged. "Claire," he began, his voice tentative, "I couldn't have done this without you, but I need to know. Are you sure about us? About this life?" She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the complexity of her emotions. "Daniel, I've questioned everything about myself since the day we met. But if there's one thing I'm certain of, it's that I don't want to face anything without you." His relief was palpable, a soft smile spreading across his face. "Then let's build something together," he said. "Not just for us, but for the people we want to help." Claire nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and determination. They weren't just partners in love, they were partners in purpose, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The soft glow of candlelight illuminated the grand hall, casting an air of warmth over the otherwise formal setting. Daniel's fundraiser dinner had finally arrived, a pivotal event, not only to restore the charity's reputation, but also to celebrate its resilience in the face of adversity. Claire stood at the edge of the room, her heart racing as she surveyed the crowd. This evening wasn't just about the charity, it was about taking another step toward bridging the gap between their worlds. Daniel approached her, his presence both calming and energizing. "You ready?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with a small smile, clutching the speech she'd carefully prepared. Public speaking wasn't her forte, but tonight she would find her voice. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere buzzed with conversation and laughter. Guests mingled, sipping champagne and bidding generously in the silent auction. Claire noticed Lily near the stage, her posture poised yet slightly tense. Their relationship had thawed since the courtroom victory, but an unspoken distance remained. When the time came for speeches, Daniel took the stage first. His words were eloquent, highlighting the charity's impact and the countless lives transformed by its programs. The audience listened intently, but as he concluded and introduced Claire, a ripple of curiosity passed through the room. Claire stepped up, her palms damp and her heart pounding. She glanced at Daniel, who gave her an encouraging nod, and then at Lily, who offered a faint smile. Taking a deep breath, she began. "I was asked to speak tonight about impact," she said, her voice trembling slightly but growing steadier. "And while I could talk about numbers or statistics, I think what matters most are the stories. Real, human stories." She recounted her own journey, sharing how access to books as a child had opened worlds of possibility for her. She spoke about the children at the library, the young boy who found his voice through storytelling, and the girl who discovered her love for science fiction. Her words painted vivid pictures, drawing the audience into the lives touched by the charity's work. Then, deviating from her script, she added, "But this isn't just about the children. It's about us, the choices we make, the risks we take, and the connections we build." When I first met Daniel, I had no idea how profoundly he would change my life. He didn't just believe in this charity, he believed in me, and that belief gave me the courage to stand here tonight. The room erupted into applause, a genuine outpouring of emotion. As Claire stepped down, Daniel met her at the bottom of the stairs, his expression filled with pride. "You were incredible," he murmured. Before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Arthur, Daniel's former partner and the man responsible for much of the charity's turmoil, had arrived uninvited. He strode into the hall, his presence sharp and commanding. "Arthur," Daniel said, his tone measured but firm, "this isn't the time or place." "Oh, but it is," Arthur replied, his voice carrying over the now hushed room. "These people deserve to know the truth." Claire's chest tightened as Arthur launched into a tirade, accusing Daniel of hiding behind his wealth and using the charity for personal gain. The accusations were the same tired lies that had been disproven, but the room held its breath, the tension palpable. It was Lily who stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Enough, Arthur," she said, her tone sharp but composed. "You've done enough damage. My father has spent his life helping others, and I won't let you tarnish that." Her words were a turning point. The crowd began murmuring in agreement, their support for Daniel evident. Arthur faltered, his confidence waning under the weight of Lily's defiance and the room's collective disdain. Security escorted him out, leaving a renewed sense of solidarity in his wake. As the evening wound down, Claire found herself on the balcony, the cool night air a welcome reprieve from the evening's intensity. Daniel joined her, his expression both relieved and reflective. "You didn't have to defend me up there," he said softly. "Yes, I did," she replied, turning to face him, "because I believe in what you're doing, and I believe in you." Daniel smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I've never had someone like you by my side, Claire. You make me better, and you make me braver," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, the distance between their worlds seemed to shrink, replaced by something far more enduring. Together, they had faced the storm, and together, they would build a future grounded in trust, purpose, and love. Claire sat in her small apartment, the quietness of the evening pressing against her. The fundraiser was a success. Daniel's name was cleared, the charity's reputation restored, yet the heaviness in her chest wouldn't lift. She stared at the note Daniel had left on her coffee table, a simple gesture of gratitude and hope that somehow deepened her unease. It wasn't Daniel that troubled her, it was herself. The words from their last conversation replayed in her mind. His vulnerability, his willingness to fight for them, had only magnified the question she couldn't yet answer. Was she truly ready to commit to a life so vastly different from her own? Could she find balance between her world and his? That morning, Claire made her way to the library, seeking the solace of routine. Olivia was already there, her usual stack of books by her side. The older woman's discerning eyes met Claire's, and without a word, she gestured for Claire to sit. "You've got that look," Olivia said, her voice tinged with gentle humor. "The one that says you're about to do something drastic." Claire smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I know what I'm doing at all." Olivia poured them both a cup of tea from the small pot she always brought. "The best decisions often feel that way," she said. "But tell me, what's weighing on you?" Claire hesitated before opening up. She spoke of the fundraiser, of Daniel's declaration of trust, and of her own growing fears. "He's so sure of us," she admitted, "and I'm not. I keep wondering if I'm enough for his world, if I can fit into it without losing myself." Olivia's gaze softened. "Claire, fitting in isn't the goal. Finding where you can stand tall, that's what matters." Later that evening, Claire visited the gallery where Max's work was displayed. His exhibition, a culmination of months of effort, brimmed with raw emotion. Each painting told a story of resilience and transformation, and Claire found herself lingering before one depicting a young girl clutching a book beneath a vast, stormy sky. "Do you like it?" Max's voice startled her. He stood beside her, his expression a mix of pride and nervousness. "It's beautiful," Claire said sincerely. "It feels hopeful." Max nodded, his gaze fixed on the painting. "It's about finding light in chaos," he said, "like you and Daniel did." Claire's stomach tightened. "I don't know if we've found it yet," she admitted. "I'm still trying to figure out where I stand." Max looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've stood by him through everything. Isn't that enough?" The question stayed with Claire as she returned home, her thoughts a whirlwind. That night, she pulled out an old journal, one she hadn't written in for years. She began listing her fears, her doubts, and, most importantly, her hopes. It was an exercise Olivia had suggested months ago, and now it felt like a lifeline. The next morning, Claire made a decision. She called Daniel and asked to meet him, her voice steady but tinged with resolve. When they met at a small park, they'd often walked through together. His eyes searched hers with quiet concern. "I need to step back," Claire said, her words measured but firm. "Not because I don't care, but because I need to figure out what I want, what I can give to us." Daniel's face fell, but he nodded, his respect for her choice evident. "I don't want to pressure you, Claire," he said, "but I want you to know that I believe in us, no matter how long it takes." They parted with an embrace that felt both heavy and hopeful. As Claire walked away, she felt the ache of their separation, but also a flicker of clarity. This wasn't an ending. It was a pause, a chance to find the balance she so desperately needed. In the days that followed, Claire threw herself into her work at the library. She launched a new program, inspired by Max's art, combining literature and creativity to help children express themselves. The program's success filled her with a sense of purpose, reminding her of the impact she could make on her own terms. Olivia, ever the quiet mentor, continued to offer her wisdom. "Sometimes," she said one afternoon, "love isn't about fitting together perfectly. It's about growing side by side, even when the path gets rocky." Claire thought of Daniel, of his unwavering belief in her, and felt a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't ready to return to him yet, but she knew she wouldn't stay away forever. The space they had created wasn't an absence. It was an opportunity to build something stronger. As the weeks passed, Claire found herself reflecting less on her fears and more on her hopes. And in the quiet moments, she began to understand that her independence and her love for Daniel weren't opposing forces. They were parts of the same story, a story still unfolding. Claire stood in the library's newly renovated children's wing, her fingers brushing over the spines of freshly donated books. The bright space was a testament to everything she and Daniel had fought for, a physical manifestation of hope, creativity, and resilience. Yet, despite the pride swelling in her chest, Claire felt the quiet weight of an unresolved question pressing down on her. Since stepping back from her relationship with Daniel, she'd thrown herself into her work, determined to find clarity in the routine. But her days felt incomplete and her nights were restless. The space she'd created between them, though necessary, had left a hollow ache. Olivia found her in the corner of the room, organizing a stack of picture books. The older woman's discerning eyes softened as she approached. "You've been busy," Olivia said, her tone laced with quiet encouragement. "But I can see your heart is somewhere else." Claire sighed, sinking into a nearby chair. "I thought distance would make everything clearer, but it hasn't. If anything, it's made me realize how much I care for him." Olivia nodded, sitting beside her. "Love doesn't always come with certainty," she said. "Sometimes it's about choosing to step into the unknown, even when it scares you." That afternoon, Claire visited Sarah, who was tending to a small garden behind the community center. The vibrant colors of blooming flowers mirrored the artist's gentle optimism. As they chatted, Sarah revealed something Claire hadn't known. "Daniel and I grew up in the same neighborhood," Sarah said, wiping dirt from her hands. "We weren't wealthy, but we had big dreams. Daniel's drive to help others comes from that. He knows what it's like to feel overlooked." Claire absorbed the story, her understanding of Daniel deepening. It wasn't his wealth that defined him. It was the person he'd chosen to become despite it. For the first time, Claire felt a flicker of certainty. Perhaps she had been looking at their differences through the wrong lens. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire made her way to the park where Daniel often walked to clear his mind. She found him sitting on a bench, his posture relaxed, but his expression distant. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, his face lighting up with quiet surprise. "Claire," he said, standing, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I needed to talk," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've spent so much time doubting myself, doubting us. But I realize something. What scares me isn't our differences. It's the possibility of losing myself in something this big." Daniel's gaze softened as he stepped closer. "You're not losing yourself," he said gently. "If anything, you've shown me what it means to stay true to who you are." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I want to try, Daniel. I want to be with you. But I need us to build something that allows both of us to grow, something where we're equals, supporting each other." His smile was warm, his relief palpable. "That's all I've ever wanted," he said, "to build something with you, not for you." They spent the next hour walking through the park, their conversation flowing easily as they began to envision a shared future. Daniel shared his plans for a community project, a space where children could explore art and literature, combining their passions into something transformative. Claire's heart swelled at the thought of working together to create something meaningful. As they sat on a bench overlooking a small pond, Claire turned to Daniel. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me, even when I didn't." He reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "And thank you for reminding me what truly matters." In that moment, the doubts that had plagued Claire began to fade. She wasn't stepping into Daniel's world. They were creating a new one together, one defined by love, respect, and a shared commitment to making a difference. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The hum of quiet determination filled the newly renovated library, as Claire and Daniel stood side by side in the children's wing, surrounded by stacks of art supplies and shelves brimming with books. It was the day they had been planning for weeks, the soft launch of the community project they envisioned together, combining literature and art to inspire creativity and hope among underprivileged children. For Claire, it wasn't just a new initiative. It was the culmination of her personal journey toward finding balance and purpose alongside Daniel. As children began to trickle in, their eyes wide with curiosity, Max arrived, carrying a large canvas under one arm. His confidence, once tentative, now radiated as he set up his station for an art workshop. "This place is incredible," he said to Claire, his voice brimming with awe. "You've created something really special here." "We've created it," Claire corrected, smiling warmly. "You've been a huge part of this." Lisa appeared moments later, clipboard in hand, her demeanor brisk yet kind, as she organized the flow of activities. Since uncovering Arthur's sabotage and playing a pivotal role in clearing Daniel's name, Lisa had become a cornerstone of their efforts. "We're on track," she said, glancing at Claire. "But don't forget to enjoy this moment. It's a big one." As the first workshop began, Claire watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride as Max guided a group of children through a painting exercise. Across the room, Daniel knelt beside a boy struggling to read, his patience and encouragement drawing a smile from the child. It was a scene Claire had imagined but never fully believed could come to life, a world where their strengths complemented each other seamlessly. Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned, Daniel approached Claire with a look of quiet satisfaction. "It's everything I hoped it would be," he said, his voice low, "and so much more." "It's just the beginning," Claire replied. "There's so much more we can do." That evening, they gathered with Max, Lisa, Olivia, and Sarah for a small dinner to celebrate the day's success. The conversation was light-hearted, filled with laughter and reflections on how far they had all come. Olivia, ever the sage, raised a toast. "To the power of connection," she said, "and to what we can achieve when we believe in each other." As the night wound down, Daniel and Claire found themselves alone, the quiet intimacy of the moment drawing them closer. Daniel took her hand, his expression serious, yet tender. "Claire, I've been thinking about what's next," he began, "not just for the project, but for us." Claire's heart skipped a beat as he continued. "I want us to keep building. This, our lives, everything. But I want to do it as equals, as partners. Your independence, your vision, they're what make this work, and they're what I love about you." Her eyes welled with tears as his words sank in. "I've always been afraid that being with you would mean losing myself," she admitted. "But now I see that it doesn't have to. We can grow together without losing who we are." They talked late into the night, crafting ideas for the project's future and imagining a life that blended their worlds without compromising their individuality. It was a conversation filled with hope and trust, the kind of partnership they had both yearned for but never fully believed was possible. As Claire lay in bed that night, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the uncertainty of sitting at the wrong table to the confidence of standing beside Daniel as an equal. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt truly ready to face them, bolstered by the strength they had found in each other. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was the beginning of a story they would write together. The courtroom was packed with anticipation. Rows of spectators, reporters, and a few familiar faces buzzed with quiet whispers as Daniel prepared to take the stand. Claire sat behind him, her heart pounding, both with concern for him and pride in the journey they had endured together. This wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about vindicating the integrity of everything they had worked so hard to build. Lisa stood nearby, her presence a symbol of quiet strength. Over the past months, her tireless work had been instrumental in uncovering the truth about Arthur's schemes. She had pieced together the documents that would exonerate Daniel, her determination as unyielding as her loyalty to the cause. When the judge called for silence, Daniel rose, his tall frame radiating a quiet confidence. The questions came swiftly, probing his involvement in the charity's operations and the accusations of fraud. With every answer, Daniel's composure remained unshaken, his voice firm as he explained the discrepancies and emphasized his commitment to the organization's mission. The turning point came when Lisa presented the evidence, a meticulously compiled trail of documents linking Arthur to the fraudulent activities. As the details unfolded, the courtroom held its collective breath. Arthur's attempts to manipulate funds, forge signatures, and sabotage Daniel's reputation were laid bare. It was a damning account, and the weight of it hung heavy in the air. When the judge delivered the verdict, declaring Daniel's innocence and holding Arthur accountable, the room erupted in applause. Claire felt tears spring to her eyes, a mix of relief and triumph coursing through her. Daniel turned to her, his gaze filled with gratitude, and she smiled, her heart full. Later that evening, the atmosphere at the community project's grand opening was electric. The once empty building had been transformed into a vibrant hub for children and families, complete with reading nooks, art studios, and classrooms. Claire marveled at the sight of children eagerly exploring the space, their laughter echoing through the halls. During the event, Daniel approached Claire, his expression one of quiet pride. "This is our victory," he said softly, gesturing to the lively scene before them. "Not just mine." "No," Claire replied, her voice warm. "It's theirs. We just gave them the tools." When it was time for the speeches, Claire found herself standing before the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself, drawing strength from the people around her. "This project," she began, "is more than a building. It's a testament to what happens when people believe in each other, when they take risks, when they dare to dream." She shared stories of the children who had inspired her, their resilience a reminder of why they had fought so hard. She spoke of the power of community, of the importance of creating spaces where everyone could thrive. Her words were met with a standing ovation, the crowd's applause a thunderous affirmation of her journey. As the night wore on, Claire and Daniel found a quiet moment amidst the celebration. They stood together under the stars, the hum of the event fading into the background. Daniel took her hand, his touch grounding her in the moment. "You've changed my life, Claire," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not just by standing by me, but by showing me what it means to truly connect with someone. And you've shown me that I'm stronger than I ever believed," she replied, her voice soft but resolute. "That I can be myself and still be part of something bigger." In that moment, the future felt limitless. Their paths, once so different, had converged into something extraordinary, a partnership built on trust, respect, and a shared vision for a better world. Together, they had faced every challenge, and together they would continue to build a legacy that mattered. The library was quieter than usual, the morning light streaming through its wide windows, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floors. Claire moved through the aisles, her fingers grazing the spines of books she'd shelved 100 times before, but today they felt different. The space seemed alive, filled with the echoes of the laughter and hope that had been cultivated through the community project. For the first time in years, Claire felt truly at home, not just in the library, but within herself. Since the launch of the community center, Claire's life had taken on a new rhythm. Her days were split between the library and the bustling hub of the project, where children painted murals, wrote stories, and shared their dreams. It was a life she never could have imagined for herself, one enriched by purpose and connection. Yet, as much as she thrived in this new chapter, she couldn't ignore the ways it had changed her. The children at the library now looked at her with wide-eyed admiration, their excitement contagious as they eagerly shared their creations. Her colleagues, too, seemed to view her differently, not just as the reliable, steady Claire, but as someone who had dared to step out of her comfort zone and create something extraordinary. While their praise warmed her heart, it also left her feeling slightly adrift, Could she fully reconcile this version of herself with the one she'd been before Daniel? That afternoon, Claire visited Olivia, who had become a constant source of wisdom and support. Olivia greeted her with a wide smile, gesturing for her to sit in the sunlit corner of her cozy apartment. "You look like a woman with something on her mind," Olivia said, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups. Claire chuckled softly. "I suppose I am," she admitted. "It's strange. Everything feels so different. The library, the project, even me." "That's because you are different," Olivia replied, her voice gentle but firm. "You've allowed yourself to grow, to see the world through a new lens, and that's a beautiful thing." They talked late into the afternoon, their conversation weaving through stories of love, loss, and the courage it takes to embrace change. Olivia shared how she'd recently started writing again, her inspiration reignited by Claire's journey. "You reminded me," Olivia said, her eyes glistening, "that it's never too late to create something meaningful." Claire left Olivia's apartment feeling a renewed sense of clarity. That evening, she visited her old neighborhood, wandering through the streets she hadn't walked in years. She found herself standing in front of the small house where she'd lived with her late husband, the sight of it stirring bittersweet memories. It was a moment of quiet reflection, a chance to acknowledge the woman she'd been and to honor the journey that had brought her here. The next morning, Claire returned to the library, a newfound confidence guiding her steps. She dove into her work with enthusiasm, collaborating with her team to expand the community project's reach. Daniel, true to his word, had become an active partner in their efforts, attending events at the library and lending his expertise to the project's development. Their partnership was seamless, built on mutual respect and a shared vision. In the midst of her busy day, Claire received a surprise visit from Lily. The young woman's demeanor was noticeably softer, her guarded expression replaced by a tentative smile. "I wanted to thank you," Lily began, her voice sincere, "for standing by my dad and for helping me see things differently." Claire was taken aback by the honesty in Lily's words, a warmth spreading through her chest. "You don't have to thank me," she said gently. "We're all learning how to navigate this together." Lily nodded, her smile widening. "I'm glad you're part of his life and mine," she added, her tone carrying a newfound sense of acceptance. As the day drew to a close, Claire sat in her office, reflecting on how far she'd come. The woman who had once felt small and out of place now stood at the center of something much larger than herself, a network of people and projects that had transformed not only her life, but the lives of countless others. For the first time in years, Claire felt truly at peace with who she was and where she was headed. She was no longer defined by her fears or the expectations of others. Instead, she was creating a life built on authenticity, love, and purpose, a life that was entirely her own. Claire awoke to the soft hum of a new day. The light streaming through her apartment window felt different now, warmer, more inviting, as if reflecting the changes within her. Since the grand opening of the community project, life had settled into a rhythm, one that blended the familiar with the extraordinary. Yet she was acutely aware of how much her world had shifted since sitting at the wrong table that fateful evening. Her morning began as it often did, walking to the library with a cup of coffee in hand. The streets of Seattle bustled with their usual energy, but Claire noticed how her steps felt lighter. Her colleagues greeted her with newfound admiration, their conversations tinged with pride in the community project they had supported through her vision. The children, too, seemed to view her differently. To them, she wasn't just a librarian anymore. She was someone who had shown them that stories could leap off the page and change lives. That afternoon, Daniel visited the library, his presence as calming as ever. He had become a regular, offering his insights for literacy initiatives and quietly donating resources to expand their programs. Today, however, his visit was personal. Together, they worked on finalizing the details for an upcoming event, a collaborative fundraiser between the library and the community center. "You've made this place shine," Daniel said, as they sat in her small office, surrounded by stacks of books and posters for the event. "It's inspiring," Claire smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "It's not just me," she replied. "This place thrives because of the people who believe in it. And in us." Later that evening, Claire found herself at a small dinner hosted by Lily. It was an unexpected invitation, but one Claire had accepted with cautious optimism. To her surprise, Lily's demeanor had softened considerably since their first encounter. Over the course of the meal, Lily shared stories of her childhood, her struggles with feeling overshadowed by her father's influence, and her initial reluctance to accept anyone into their close-knit world. "I think I was afraid," Lily admitted, her voice low but steady, "afraid that you'd take him away from me, but I see now that you're not just here for him, you're here for all of us." The confession left Claire momentarily speechless, but she reached across the table, her hand resting gently over Lily's. "I've never wanted to take anything away," she said softly. "I just want to be part of what makes him, and all of you, whole." The evening marked a turning point, a genuine connection forming between Claire and Lily. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step toward something stronger. In the weeks that followed, Claire and Daniel navigated their intertwined lives with a newfound ease. He joined her at library events, charming the children with his anecdotes, while she accompanied him to philanthropic meetings, offering her perspective on grassroots initiatives. Each event felt like a small victory, proof that their worlds could merge without either of them losing their individuality. Max's art exhibition was another highlight. Held at a prestigious gallery downtown, the event was a celebration of his journey and the stories he had captured through his work. Claire was moved to tears as she saw one of his paintings, a piece depicting a small library surrounded by vibrant colors, titled "Where It All Began." When she asked Max about it, he smiled. "That's for you," he said, "for showing me that stories, whether in books or on canvas, can change the world." Lisa, too, had found her footing. Inspired by her work with Daniel and Claire, she had started a small consulting firm aimed at helping non-profits streamline their operations. At a quiet moment during the exhibition, she pulled Claire aside. "You've shown me what it means to believe in people," Lisa said. "And more importantly, what it means to believe in myself." As Claire walked home that night, she reflected on how far they had all come. Not just herself, but everyone whose lives had intersected through the unlikely chain of events that began with her mistaken dinner. She thought of Olivia, who was now writing her memoir, Sarah, who had expanded her role as a mentor to young artists, Max, whose art inspired countless others, and Lisa, whose confidence had blossomed into leadership. At home, Claire settled into her favorite armchair, a steaming cup of tea in hand. The quiet felt comforting, not isolating, as it once had. She opened her journal, flipping through pages filled with doubts and dreams, until she reached the most recent entry, a promise to herself to embrace love and purpose, wherever they might lead. When her phone buzzed, it was Daniel. His message was simple but heartfelt. "I'm proud of us, for everything we've built and everything we're becoming. I can't wait to see what's next." Claire smiled, her heart swelling. For the first time, the future felt like an open book, each page waiting to be written with courage, love, and endless possibilities. The morning sunlight filtered through the library's expansive windows, illuminating a space that had transformed into a thriving hub of creativity and learning. Claire walked through the children's wing, her steps light as she watched the young faces engrossed in activities, painting, reading, and collaborating on a mural that would soon adorn the library's central wall. This place, once a quiet sanctuary, had become a beacon of possibility, and Claire felt a surge of pride knowing how far they had come. The community project had gained momentum, attracting attention from local media and philanthropists alike. Donations poured in, allowing for expanded programs and resources. The library was no longer just a repository of books, but a center where art, literature, and innovation flourished. Daniel arrived mid-morning, his presence as steadying as ever. He carried a stack of books under one arm and a folder of potential donor proposals in the other. His commitment to the project was unwavering, and together they had built something that was more than either of them had imagined. "Good morning," Daniel greeted, his smile warm. "You look radiant today." Claire blushed slightly, brushing back a strand of hair. "It's the kids," she replied. "Their energy is contagious." As they settled into a quiet corner to review the day's agenda, Lisa approached, a clipboard in hand. "We've got a full schedule," she announced, her voice tinged with excitement. "Workshops in the morning, a donor tour at noon, and Max is hosting an art showcase this afternoon." Max's exhibition had been a resounding success, his work now sought after by collectors and galleries across the city. True to his roots, he had pledged a portion of his profits to the community project, a gesture that moved Claire deeply. At the showcase, Max unveiled a new series of paintings inspired by the children he worked with. One piece, titled "The Bridge," depicted a vivid connection between two worlds, an ode to the journey Claire and Daniel had undertaken together. Later that evening, as the library quieted, Claire and Daniel attended a celebratory dinner with the project's key supporters. Lily joined them, her demeanor markedly different from their earlier encounters. She no longer saw Claire as an outsider, but as a vital part of their shared mission. Over the meal, Lily made a heartfelt apology. "I was wrong about you," she admitted, her voice steady. "You've shown me what it means to care, not just about my dad, but about something bigger than yourself." Claire was touched, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and relief. "It means a lot to hear that," she said. "I've always wanted us to find common ground." As the dinner wound down, Sarah and Olivia joined their table, their faces alight with the joy of witnessing what had grown from such humble beginnings. Olivia, who had completed the first draft of her memoir, shared an excerpt during dessert, her words weaving a tale of resilience and rediscovery that resonated deeply with everyone present. The following week, the library hosted an open house to showcase its new facilities and celebrate its achievements. Families filled the space, exploring every corner with awe and excitement. Claire stood at the entrance, greeting visitors alongside Daniel. It was a moment of profound fulfillment, the culmination of countless hours of hard work and unwavering belief. As the event drew to a close, Claire found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From the hesitant librarian who had stumbled into Daniel's life to the confident woman who now stood at his side, she had discovered not only love, but also a sense of purpose she hadn't known she was missing. Daniel approached, slipping his hand into hers. "This is just the beginning," he said softly, his eyes filled with warmth. "We've built something incredible together." Claire nodded, her heart full. "And there's so much more we can do." As they walked out into the evening air, the stars overhead seemed to shine brighter, a reminder of the limitless possibilities ahead. Together, they had not only bridged the gap between their worlds, but also created a legacy that would endure, a testament to the power of love, trust, and shared dreams. The sun filtered through the canopy of trees in the park, casting a golden glow over the walking paths. Claire strolled hand in hand with Daniel, their steps unhurried as they moved past families, joggers, and children chasing bubbles that glimmered in the late afternoon light. The world around them hummed with life, yet the moment felt intimate, suspended in its own quiet joy. Claire glanced at Daniel, catching the faint smile that played on his lips. It was a look she had come to cherish, not one of grandeur or pretense, but simple contentment. She squeezed his hand lightly. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Daniel chuckled softly. "How far we've come," he said, his voice laced with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. "From that first dinner, who would have thought it would lead us here?" Claire smiled, the memory of that night flooding back. "I thought I'd ruined everything," she admitted. "And yet, it was the best mistake I've ever made." They found a quiet bench near a small pond where ducks glided across the surface. The scene was serene, a perfect backdrop for the conversation that naturally unfolded. They talked about the community project's continued growth, the lives it had touched, and the plans they had for its future. Max's latest art exhibit had garnered praise, and Lisa's new consultancy was thriving. Everything they had nurtured seemed to be blossoming. "I never imagined my life would look like this," Claire said, her tone reflective. "I thought I'd spend my days in the library, reading stories about other people's adventures, never living my own." Daniel turned to her, his gaze steady. "You were always living your own story, Claire. You just needed to believe it was worth telling." His words struck a chord deep within her. For so long, she had measured her worth against the expectations of others, feeling small and insignificant in the grander schemes of life. But now, sitting beside Daniel in the park, she realized how far she had come. She had found her voice, her confidence, and a love that didn't overshadow her but amplified her strengths. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching as a group of children began a game of tag nearby. Their laughter filled the air, a melody of pure, unfiltered joy. Claire felt a pang of nostalgia, remembering her younger self, curious, hopeful, and yet so unsure of what the future held. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, breaking the silence, "about what's next, not just for the project, but for us." Claire tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "And what have you decided?" "I don't want to rush," he said thoughtfully. "I've learned that the best things take time, but I do know that whatever comes next, I want to face it with you." Her heart swelled at his words. "I feel the same," she said softly. "For the first time, I'm not afraid of the future, because I know we'll build it together." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting hues of pink and orange across the sky, Claire leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. They sat there, watching the world transition into evening, their thoughts unspoken but understood. It was a moment of profound peace, the culmination of their journey and the promise of everything yet to come. Claire's mind wandered to the past, to the hesitant woman who had once felt out of place in her own life. That woman had found strength in unexpected places, love in unlikely circumstances, and purpose in the connections she had forged. The library, the project, the people she had met along the way, they were all threads in a tapestry she had never dreamed of weaving. As they rose to leave, Claire glanced back at the bench, the pond, the children still playing nearby. It felt symbolic, a snapshot of the life she had embraced. She turned to Daniel, her voice steady and filled with quiet conviction. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in me even when I couldn't." Daniel smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "Always," he replied. They walked away together, their steps in sync, the path ahead as bright as the fading sunlight, and in her heart, Claire carried the knowledge that sometimes life's greatest journeys began with the smallest, most unexpected moments, like sitting at the wrong table and discovering exactly where you were meant to be. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.